Hey everybody, welcome back to Black Magic Craft. This Trench Crusade board is really starting to come together. I know a lot of you wanted to see what it looked like laid out so far, so here it is. Now gearing up to start playing some games with it, I realized one problem with my setup. The trenches are pretty deep. Mine are 2 inches deep, which I think is actually fairly accurate, and it's fine for models that are running around through the trenches and getting cover, but I needed some platforms that minis could stand on and actually like shoot out of the trenches. My first instinct was to make some wood platforms that would stab into the side of these trenches and just be permanent. I figured that would be a pain for storage and transport. Like it would make the pieces bigger and also at risk of those breaking off. So it'd be a lot more practical to make some freestanding pieces for models to stand on. This would be easy to do with like foam, but that would be too light. I wanted something that was really hefty and solid, something that would absolutely stay in its place and not easily get bumped or moved around. So I went to Dollarama and I found these bootleg Jenga blocks. I figured they'd be great because I could glue them together to make the foundation of these things. And yeah, they'd be really solid and heavy. These blocks were actually kind of smaller than real Jenga blocks, but I mean, that's fine. They didn't need to be a specific size. I played around for a bit, so I could figure out the best way to stack and align them. I wanted them to be tall enough for models' heads to just pop up over the ground level and deep enough for 28mm bases to stand on. And keep in mind that these stands were essentially developed just for the regular kind of like human scale models in the game that are on the 28mm bases. I also had to ensure that they would butt up to the angle of the trench walls. After a little bit, I figured out an arrangement that worked and started gluing them together. For this, I used carpenter's glue, which if you don't know, is just a stronger PVA glue or sometimes called wood glue, and I use a fast drying one. When gluing wood to wood, this is an incredibly strong bond. And it doesn't take that long to dry, but you do want to make sure you have a nice thin full coverage on both pieces. Each of these would be constructed with 3 blocks glued together. So I first did a bunch of pairings and let that tack up before moving on to the third piece. This way all the pieces wouldn't slide around on me while I was trying to line them up and glue them together. Then I decorated the vertical faces with some coffee stir sticks. I just broke a whole bunch of them in half and glued them in place again with carpenter's glue, letting them run wild off the edges. To make the layout somewhat even, I started with gluing the 2 outside ones, then a center one, and then filled in the 2 gaps. This would give me somewhat even spacing, and I didn't really mind if there was a gap between the stir sticks, as long as it was all kind of consistent. I wanted some of these platforms to be longer, so I attached 2 of them together, and I just used hot glue to like bond the 2 ends together. This way they would immediately hold, and then I could glue the stir sticks on them that would actually bridge across both of them, and that would make the strong permanent connection. I did the same on the tops, but made sure that the planks overhung where they would meet the trench wall, just to bridge that little gap. And this was working great. Once that was dry and the wood was all super secure, I clipped off the ends. And I intentionally did this in a very messy and random way, so it looked like these were just like smacked together on a battlefield. And I left them with some overhang so that they would cover the seam of whatever I put on the ends. And for those ends, I used corrugated paper. This would look good and match the board and also be easy to cut to the angle needed to butt up to the trench walls. And I had saved some leftover strips from when I did the trench build, which I could use here. I just hot glued these on, then cut them flush at the bottom, then cut the angle going from the point on the block to the point on the planks. Now, because I had built the structure the way I did, cutting from one point to the other gave me the exact angle that I needed. And these were essentially done, but they looked too plain, so I also added some vertical supports made from narrow square balsa wood. I again used carpenter glue here since it's a really strong bond. Like super glue going wood to wood is not great actually. Can be kind of a pain, plus it gets all over your fingers and yeah, it can just be a mess. And hot glue is too thick to use on pieces like this. So some strong wood glue and a little bit of patience waiting for it to dry is the way to go. I was really happy with these. They felt nice and heavy and chonky, they looked good, and they were ready for paint. Before we jump into painting though, I do want to tell you about this video's sponsor. Quick hypothetical. Let's say you produced a bunch of miniatures. Perhaps a cool little goblin wielding 2 knives. You want to sell those miniatures to people on the internet. You're going to need a website to do that. I made my websites with Squarespace. I used one of their many templates that I then easily customized using their drag and drop editing system. I easily set up a web store where I could upload products like a knife wielding goblin. I'm now able to take web orders from anywhere in the world and easily ship them using the integrated shipping software that you can use on Squarespace. Everything you've heard about Squarespace being easy is true. It's the favorite all-in-one web hosting platform I've ever used, and I will continue to use them because they're great. If you want to make a website for yourself, use the link in my description and try out Squarespace for free. And then when you're ready to launch your website, use the code BlackMagicCraft to get 10% off your new website or domain. If you want to see how their websites can function from the consumer end of things, go to blackmagicraft.ca. Check out my products and my store. We got a new knife goblin. Now, when I make wood stuff, why do I prime it? It's already wood. People always ask that. Well, the thing is, it is wood, but it looks like craft wood. It doesn't look good or right. You can tint it with translucent ink to look more realistic, but it kind of ends up, I don't know, never looking that great, mostly because of the glue. You can actually see any spots where glue had, spilled over. It also doesn't get into all the nooks and crannies and create dark shadows. I don't know, I just don't really like it. So I fully primed them black and I painted them the way I would paint anything else. This also makes everything more cohesive. Yes, a real rock or a real piece of wood is already quote unquote the right color, but everything else that it's with is painted. Dropping a natural piece of wood or a natural rock on a table covered in painted terrain with painted models is kind of like placing a photorealistic tree in a landscape that is animated. It just stands out and looks weird. After showing these to the local Trench Crusade group that is forming here, there was some discussion about them needing ladders. Now, technically they don't the way the rules are written, but an extra visual aid wouldn't hurt, so I decided to add some. I wanted them to be small and to scale, so I used granny grating. I kind of hate this stuff because it's an oily plastic that doesn't glue or paint very well, but it can be cut up to do things like this where you want a uniform grid. Cutting out the center vertical strip made a grid that looked like a train track, but also kind of like a ladder. To paint them, I used some double-sided tape on a stick. I spray painted them brown because a spray paint that is meant to bond to plastic has more of a chance of surviving on this oily plastic than anything else. I stippled on some bright orange craft paint for some rust, and then some dirty down for some darker, more realistic rust, and a tiny bit of silver just to finish it off. Then I carefully glued them in place. And since I had the metallic craft paint out, I also hit the corrugated panels on the ends, and I didn't do full coverage, just kept it kind of sloppy. I didn't want these looking like fresh pieces. And of course I also slopped on some dirty down rust. Overall, everything was still too clean. So I used some of the colors of craft paint that I used on the trenches just to stipple on some mud. I also used some greenish brown speed paint. This is more translucent than craft paint, so it'll make some of the mud look more fresh and wet. I actually kept going with speed paints, using some dark red to simulate blood because, realistically, these things would be absolutely coated in blood. To make some blood that looked more fresh, I mixed some of that red speed paint with gloss varnish and splashed it on. And this way it would dry shiny and look like it was still wet and hadn't had time to dry or soak into the lumber. And at this point they were done. But looking at them, I didn't like some of the ladders. See, I had cut some of the ladders so that the rungs were flush to the verticals, and some I left overhanging. Once they were all done, I thought the overhang style ones looked weird. They really just looked too much like railroad pieces. I like the other way better. So hey, I just carefully trimmed them off. And then to blend everything back together, one more big last wash of speed paint on the ladders. And that's that. These shooting platforms are done. They add an excellent extra element and elevation to this board. They make the trenches feel a lot more realistic. And I really like the way they look. Most of all, I'm just happy with how heavy and solid they are. I also like that you can actually stack them together like back to back to make freestanding little like structures. That wasn't intentional, that wasn't planned, but good terrain that is designed well will often, give you a lot of different opportunities to use it in different ways that you didn't even think of. So yeah, this board is definitely ready to play on. I'm not done. There's more stuff I want to do. Like I want to make a mat that matches it better and add more scatter terrain and more stuff like these platforms just to give it even more life. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, do all the YouTube things, please, thank you. Leave a comment, share it, like it, subscribe, all that. Be sure to check out my essential equipment page on blackmagicraft.ca. The link's on there, Amazon affiliate link, so if you buy something, it costs you nothing extra and I get a small commission to help fund the production of these videos. You can also buy my original merchandise there, which includes like game soundtracks, artwork, original builds, and some original miniatures. And if you like dark skirmish games with a heavy religious overtones, check out my game, Idols of Torment. If you like Trench Crusade, you'll probably like that. And last but not least, there's always Patreon. That is a fantastic way to help me and the channel keep doing this for many more years to come. All the support there is greatly appreciated and very much needed. So I'd love to see you there. That's it. I'll see you again next time. Cheers.